Hey guys, I just want to pop on here really quickly and just and talk about something very, very simple but very profound. And of course, it's there in the headline. If something's tight, something is weak. And really, to simplify that idea is that we have to just simply look at who we are as humans and know the areas that we contend with, the areas that tend to cause the most amount of problems. And of course, these are the areas of rigidity. And so if we look at the idea of if something's tight and something is weak, there's Vladimir Yanda was I think he's a pediatric neurologist. He was a medical doctor and a physiotherapist. So this guy was a brilliant human being, very well read, obviously. And one of the things that he coined a couple of different ideas, came up with a few different concepts. One was called stratification syndrome and upper and lower cross syndrome. These are one of the many ideas that he put out there. He was one of the fathers of modern physiotherapy. And so let's look at what we call stratification syndrome. And stratification syndrome simply means that if you go up and down, front and the back of the body, what you will find is bands of tight and weak and tight and weak musculature. And so again, like a bedrock, if you look at the side of the cliff that's been cut through, you'll see, it's stratified. There's layers and layers, right? And all the layers are different. Well, the same can go said the human body is that we're stratified in that, some areas are tighter, some areas are weaker. So, for example, we quite often have very tight calves. We have tight hamstrings historically. Most people have very weak gluteal muscles, so very weak buttock muscles, tight lower back. We're quite weak, and of course, in the mid aspect of our back. So we're talking about the rhomboids, the lower traps, and we're very tight, of course, in the upper traps. We are very tight in the anterior delt, right? So the pectoralis and the anterior delt. We tend to be quite weak to the abdominal area, and of course, we're very tight to the hip flexors. We're tight on the outside of our thighs, vastus lateralis, and of course, we're generally quite weak in the adductors and the vastus medialis. All right. Right, so lots of different. So the idea of this stratification is that quite often what happens is that areas of the body that are tight and dominant tend to do a lot more work than their fair share. In fact, when energy comes into the body, whenever form, the muscles that are tight and hyper responsive tend to take on way too much stress. And of course, these create not only the imbalances that we have, but they exaggerate them, and of course, leading to the point of what we generally see as kind of orthopedic injuries. We develop instabilities where, of course, to make a joint stable, it's ideal to have a similar amount of tension on one side of the joint as we do the other. So no matter where we move, that joint's in full control. A good example, of course, of an area that's quite unstable for so many people is the area of the shoulder joint. And the shoulder joint, for example, again, if you look at the anterior portion of the shoulder, because of modern posture, we look at the lives that so many of us lead. And of course, what am I doing here? I'm sitting in front of a computer. I've been in front of it for the last, let's say 65 minutes or so. I cycled 26 kilometers today. So what was my posture like? Well, I'm leaning forward on a bike. So again, I had that flex posture. So the biggest part of my day, unfortunately, has been in postural flexion, right? So my hip flexors are tight. My abs are probably kind of shorten me forward. My chest and shoulders probably rounded a little bit forward. So one of the things that I should do before I go to bed is actually stretch out the anterior portion of my body, and then work on actually stimulating the posterior chain of my body, just so I actually bring that balance back into play. But again, now the other part, and again, I want to go this really briefly, but again, it's just it's really important that we start paying attention to the degree of excessive tension that we have inside our body. So having tight hamstrings doesn't mean that you just need to stretch them. Having really tight hamstrings is telling you something else is weak, and there's a potential risk factor there. And the risk factor generally is to your lower back. Because the hamstrings, see in the diagram here, can you see, I'm doing this backwards here, and up a little bit right there. Can you see the image behind where my finger is? I'm kind of poking the skeleton right in the butt. right? So that little space right below my finger, that's hard to do in reverse, is called the ischial tuberosity, and that's where the hamstrings feed up into. Now, at the hamstrings, because they attach to the base of our pelvis, if the hamstrings are inordinately short, so they're quite short, what they'll do is they'll rotate the pelvis and they'll pull the pelvis at a neutral, which of course adds more stress to the lower back. And because it actually kind of disfigures the natural alignment and curve of the lumbar spine, it puts more stress there. Now, the other interesting thing is that most of us, of course, we're not tight symmetrically. We're asymmetrically tight, which creates what we call gross postural asymmetries. So let's say my left hamstring, I'll try this again. All right, let's say my left hamstring right there is really, really tight, and my right hamstring doesn't have the same degree of tension. So what does that actually do to my hips? So if one hamstring is really tight and the other one isn't so much, it's actually going to rotate my pelvis into a position we call sacral torsion. It rotates my pelvis, but it also twists my spine. So if my hips do this, right, so my pelvis, right, so you think about a hip bone, right, your spinal column sitting in between, and then because of a really short hamstring, it's actually with the short hamstring, it's going to rotate my pelvis backwards. Right, so it's going to what we call retroversion. So rotate my pelvis backwards, and again, I'm probably going to have this rotation in my pelvis here. And now we're not even talking about what the hip flexors are doing as well, right? So if it's just the hamstring's the issue, so the hamstring will pull tight. Let's say more on this side here, so it rotates the pelvis back, which actually kind of turns the spine. Now, of course, if it turns the spine, the tendency would be you think it would turn the whole body. But the body won't do that. Actually, what the spine's going to do, because we have a righting reflex, the spine is going to rotate itself back to neutral. So let's say we have a 10-degree rotation caused by the hamstring. So my lower back is being pulled one position here. The segments above it, so let's say lumbar, 4 or 5, let's say lumbar segments 3, 4, and 5 get rotated, let's say 10 degrees this way. It's pretty extreme. And then the body, actually what the body's going to do is going to rotate lumbar 2 and 1 back to neutral. So all of a sudden, my lower back is actually torqued, right? So not only am my pelvis is torqued, it's actually rotated on my spine, and then my body wanted to right itself, so it actually rotated back to neutral, so I'm square facing. Right, so it makes sense. So it's a bit of a righting reflex, and we always sort of rotate back to neutral, irrespective of what's going on inside of the length of our spine. So these are the interesting things that we see when we look at inflexibility. And so people very glibly say, "Well, I'm pretty tight. Maybe I should stretch." Yeah, it's not really that. It's not really that light of a topic, really, because if you look at what inflexibility will do to you, right? If it's left unchecked and left unmeasured, of course, it can over time actually wreak havoc, of course, on your lower back. Now, let's flip to the front side here, and let's look at the hip flexors. So let's go back up, see if I can do this here. Right now, you see this image right here, right where my finger is, that's a cutaway of the torso, right? So if I go up here, this is really hard to do. All right, so your hip flexor is right up in there. All right, the magic finger. So the hip flexor, well, it does just that. It actually flexes the hip. Right, so if I'm standing and I bring my knee up, of course I've flexed my thigh upward, and my psoas, iliopsoas, is actually one of the muscles responsible for doing that. If my hip flexor is very short, what ends up happening, of course, now we talked about the hamstring, the way it's attached in the back, it actually rotates my pelvis backwards. Well, if my hip flexor attached in the front, it will rotate me forward. So what if you actually had a really short hamstring and a really short hip flexor on opposing sides? So what may happen is that, let's say my right hamstring is really short and my left hip flexor is really tight. So now my whole pelvis has done this. One's gone back, one's gone forward. And again, what does that do to the lower back? Well, it wreaks havoc on it, and anything that happens at the level of the lower part of the spine radiates all the way up the spine, right up into your cervical spine. It affects your shoulders. It affects everything. It's quite an amazing mess that we create. So one of the things I always recommend to people, if they haven't seen a physio in a while, find a physiotherapist or find somebody like me in your neighborhood, right? So my background is as a medical exercise specialist. So if you can find somebody, either find a good kinesiologist, because there's lots of bad ones, find a trainer with the designation of a post-rehab conditioning specialist or medical exercise specialist. Those are two really great designations. You'll find somebody who's able to actually take you through what we call a musculoskeletal screening, and we want to have our postural. We want a postural assessment done. I'm trying to get my thoughts here. So we want to be able to look at, make sure that see what the left and right hamstrings are doing, see what the left and right hip flexors are doing. Look at spinal stability, look at neck rotation, look at shoulder range of motion, right? And have all these things assessed before you invest a lot of time into a particular fitness program, because the risk factor is what's tight gets tighter, and what is weak remains weak. And of course, the risk is to all the joints in our body. Right, so we risk a lot of silly damage just because we didn't take the time to actually set the groundwork first. But and that's some of the conversations we have within our Factor 3 fitness program. And the reason why I designed the program, why I designed Factor 3 in the beginning, was because of all these conversations, was because of all these considerations. Right, so operating myself, being a power-based athlete, but also actually having a background in rehabilitation as well, I really looked at the whole process quite a bit differently. And yes, I know people wanted great results, people wanted to train hard, people wanted some intensity. However, in doing so and actually moving towards those goals, it's really, really crucial that both you and your trainer, or whatever program that you're involved in, really takes into account the orthopedic stability as a primary concern. And that, of course, that is the hallmark of the Factor 3 Fitness program, and it's what we built into it right from the very beginning. So again, remember, if something tight is something weak, there's something weak in your body, you need to go check it out. All right, guys, have a great night. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks for hanging out.